All right, great, everyone. I know there's still some people that are going to be funneling in here over the next couple minutes to get on Zoom, but we'll get started since we have like a really exciting agenda today. Um, I'm Ray Mina. I'm the head of marketing at Fresh Paint. And we're going to get to the good part, but just a few things to kind of kick us off before we get started. First, I just wanted to give a really big thanks to Molly and James and Tanya and Pete for doing this event. I know that your days are demanding. Someone here is getting married soon. So like, thank you for being so generous, like with your time for all of us. A strange but true story that I recently attended a webinar that wasn't recorded. This one will be, so you can look forward to getting the recording in your inbox. And yeah, please do share it with colleagues and friends as well that you think it'll be helpful with. We're also going to open up a Q&A section in Zoom here. So I encourage you to add any questions you have, or there's an upvote feature. So upvote other questions you like. And that way, as we get towards the end, the panelists will have a chance to address hopefully as many of them as we possibly can. And, you know, shameless marketing plug, but lastly, I just wanted to say that I'm personally passionate about this topic because part of getting patients and customers to stick with your product really does involve measuring what they're doing and then running plays to help drive the desired behaviors. And that's what we do at Fresh Paint. We help you get the customer behavioral data that you need to do all that without writing code. And we're the only one that can do it in a HIPAA compliant way. So that's enough of housekeeping. Peter, I'm going to kick it over to you and to the panel, and can't wait to learn some things today. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ray. Hi, folks. Wonderful to see so many people joining this webinar. Thank you for taking time out of your day, and again, thank you to the panelists. Looking forward to having a great conversation today. Before we get going, I'll introduce myself. I'm Pete McRobert. I'm the founder of a company called Capable Health. Capable is a healthcare developer platform for building, launching, and scaling digital healthcare experiences and products. You can think of us like, essentially a clinic in a box. We provide you all of the tools you need for patient intake, surveys, workflows, prescriptions, RCM, labs. And everything has an API wrapped around it, so you can build and customize the experience to your heart's content. And a lot of the experience that went into Capable was derived from my background as the CTO of another high-growth startup called Candid, a direct-to-consumer orthodontic startup based out of New York City. And we had to build absolutely every single stitch of that product ourselves by hand, and it was very painful, and don't recommend doing that. So we launched Capable Health about 2 years ago, and happy to chat about it in a different call. But today, very excited to introduce the panel and talk about patient engagement and outcomes. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce you to everyone. We have Molly McGrath from Elara, James Wong from Carrot Fertility, and Tanya Jain from Evie Health. I'll be going through each of them individually and asking them to introduce themselves to you, tell you a little bit about what their company does, and what stage the company's at. I think it's helpful. We have a range of different companies here today at different stages of growth, and so you'll hear a wide range of opinions about what's important at each stage, and also describe the product and your customer or your member. So why don't we start off with Molly?
Cool. Hi. I'm Molly McGrath. I'm the head of product at Elara. We're a seed stage company, and we're doing virtual care for chronic hormonal conditions. We specifically work with women right now, and we actually also are really focused on PCOS as our kind of first condition. So yeah, really excited about this and excited to be with this group of panelists too.
Great to have you. Tanya, take it away.
Cool. Hey, everyone. I'm Tanya Jain. I'm the head of product at Evie. We're also a seed stage startup, so happy to be in Elara's company, but we're really focused on closing the gender health gap by creating and leveraging the largest data set of female biomarkers. Today, we're doing that by offering an at-home vaginal microbiome test, which is really cool. Definitely recommend everyone to swab who can. And we use full metagenomic sequencing to help people better understand the different bacteria and fungi that might be present in their vaginal microbiome, which is super important because it helps people decode their different vaginal infections and symptoms. Previously, I worked at Roe as the main retention PM, so this conversation is my bread and butter, and I'm super excited to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, Tanya. James.
Hi, everybody. So really, Carrot's mission is about making fertility care accessible to all, regardless of age, race, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or even geography. And to us, we think about fertility care as not simply being just a female-only healthcare issue. We believe that it's a fundamental sort of part of human healthcare that impacts everyone. And in fact, 40% of Carrot's members are actually male. So our solution is a clinically managed program that covers a variety of fertility healthcare journeys, including preservation, in vitro fertilization, donor and gestational surrogacy, adoption, pregnancy, menopause, and low testosterone. And many sort of components of our product that supports all of these journeys include something called Carrot RX, which is a premium pharmacy experience that passes along significant savings to our members, as well as the Carrot Card, which is a flexible pre-funded card that employees can use to pay for eligible care. So in terms of scale, Carrot has approximately 450 customers, including Box, Snap, Peloton, and covers more than 1 million lives in over 120 countries. So we work with companies in a pretty diverse range of industries. And in my role as Chief Product Officer, I'm responsible for supporting the end-to-end development strategy and ongoing operations of our offering. So what that means in practice is many of the functions typically seen in products such as product management, design, engineering, but also key subject verticals in global solutions that covers regulatory, financial, and provider aspects of care, but also medical solutions, which covers the medical and scientific elements of care. Pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Fantastic. So a lot of very interesting opinions around the table today, and I think maybe to sort of set the stage a little bit, it'd be great to understand from each of your perspective, when we talk about outcomes, right? What do we really mean? What do you mean in your business? How do you think about measuring those outcomes? Like, firstly, what are those outcomes that you're tracking, and then maybe give us a little flavor of how you track them and measure them. I think why don't we kick it over to Tanya first?
Yeah. Sorry if I have a coughing fit in the middle of this, but I think outcomes are extremely personal and they really depend on the person who's coming to your platform to seek care. I think part of it is very scientific and objective, if that's something that you can observe, but part of it is also really psychological and just dependent on, does someone consider themselves treated? So for Evie, I think generally we're able to assess all of the different pathogens in someone's microbiome, and we can see the distribution of good bacteria to bad bacteria, and we can see how that changes over time. So for us, that's like the objective measure of like, was your outcome better or not? I'm really reducing it. This is just a really big generalization. But I think what that, just looking at the shift in distribution, what that misses is, does someone consider themselves to be treated? I think that's almost more important, because someone might not be microbially sick, but they still might not consider themselves treated and needs further treatment in some way or form. So I think in that case, looking at outcomes as self-reported data also matched with the objective data is super important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that really kind of touches on a really interesting trend, which is like, fundamentally you want your patients, your members, your users to feel better and feel that the product works. And then on the other side, if you're working with payers and large institutions or employers, potentially you are also responsible for reporting quality metrics, which might be a different kind of set of outcomes. Maybe James, I'm sure you have some experience here. How does this world look for you and at your scale?
Yeah, given I rattled off like half a dozen to a dozen different journeys that we support members through as part of what we define as fertility healthcare, there are certainly a diverse set of outcomes. So the way that we think about it is there are outcomes that relate to how members feel about the service that they're getting from Carrot. So a lot of this is about meeting members where they are and helping them navigate through their fertility healthcare journey in their own way that feels right to them, and not necessarily forcing to any specific outcomes. And so, a lot of those outcome measures largely relate to retention at employers. So 96% of Carrot members say that they use the Carrot benefit are more likely to stay at their company because, because the company offers Carrot, or that we measure sort of our CSAT rates at close to 90%. Then there's another category, which is more around the key drivers of cost in fertility healthcare. They're not as comprehensive in that not every fertility healthcare journey sort of costs the same. There are a few that we target around pregnancy and IVF outcomes because they're the primary drivers of cost. And so in those cases, we look at rates such as single embryo transfer rates, because we know that, risks that come with carrying multiples are sort of to quadruple cost of singleton births. And so we pride ourselves there at driving single embryo transfer rates at 90% compared to the national average of 77%. And that's sort of what we measure as a subset of the key drivers of cost outcomes.
Yeah, got it. Molly, from Alara's perspective, I know you've got a product in market. You've grown a lot over the last year. I'm curious, what are you measuring today in terms of outcomes? What's important to you?
Yeah. Well, I think it actually hasn't changed too much in terms of what we started off measuring and what we measure now. So, like at a super high, simple level, we're trying to help people achieve their health goals, and we're trying to see these patients get healthier. And so for us, like some specific things we see when a patient is achieving health goals and getting healthier might be a successful pregnancy was for somebody who previously thought they would need to go through IVF and then was able to get pregnant naturally. A patient who's pre-diabetic moving into a normal range, that's like a very clear sign that they're getting healthier and achieving a goal. And then I think mental health, and kind of to what Tanya's point around this too, like patients saying that they feel more in control of their health, patients saying that their mental health is improving just because they like have access to care that they previously didn't have. We see that actually move the needle on like an anxiety and depression score as well. So I think we kind of have this like really high level thing around, we want to see people get healthier, and then what that is for each person might vary. But it should ladder up to like patient happiness. I mean, eventually it is lower cost for their payer or their employer. But a lot of it is, it's like a mix of self-reported and I guess like labs as well.
Got it. And so, like, I guess on that topic of, you sort of started to talk about some of the ways that you actually, might measure it. Are there any particular, like, quality metrics or scores that you track in particular that are important to your population?
Yeah. So we have a concept of like a patient goal, and it's not like it's very personal and very manually done right now, where the patient and the provider kind of collaborate on what their health goals are going to be, and they talk about them in like, like habit building way. So it might be like, I'm going to run, 3 times a week for 45 minutes. That's a goal I have, and that's going to ladder up to this like bigger goal I have over the long term. And so what we're kind of measuring is like, okay, if patients are doing the small goals that they are kind of saying they want to do and that their provider agrees should ladder up to a good outcome, does that actually show a good outcome? And then we kind of check it. So we have those goals running, and then we sort of check in every week or month, or we have, it kind of like varies. But we're checking in on a few metrics around just like overall what we want to see as like a healthy person. So mental health, emotional health, physical health, and then labs again are like kind of a secondary, or like I shouldn't say secondary, like a separate thing that we're doing. but aren't as frequent. So we needed like this touch point in between when you get your labs redone, because you're obviously not going to go get those done every week, but we needed something kind of in the middle to say, okay, are you like on the right track? Does this feel like it's working for you? And we've found that even though self-reported outcomes are usually pretty indicative, people are pretty honest if things are going well or not.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I, one of the things that that we thought about a lot at Candid was, the sort of types of things that you were tracking really kind of changed depending on where someone was, like, in the process of signing up to become a member or receiving care. And I'm curious, does that, maybe, Tanya, I know you've been doing a lot of innovation at the sort of top of funnel of Evie's experience. Like, do you think about measuring or tracking that engagement and that sort of those outcomes at different stages of the funnel, or do you sort of think about it as like one complete journey from end to end?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think at the stage that Evie is at, we think about it as one journey, but like previously at Row, we thought about them as distinct moments. So like the onboarding moment where we can get someone to realize the core value prop. After they realize the core value prop, how do we establish a habit around the core value prop? And then if they like haven't established that habit, how do we get them re-engaged? And so
Right.
I think with the current way Evie's run, we definitely think about it as a single funnel, but I'm assuming we'll keep breaking that down as we learn more.
Yeah, I'm sure. James, again, at sort of a little bit further down the track, and having lots of different members at different points in their care, how do you think about, all of the different states that someone might be in, or that a couple might be in, and kind of tracking what's important to them? Do you have different metrics that you use at different points of their journey?
Yeah, well, we certainly have sort of different modules of content targeted at each of the journeys. Given what you said around the diversity of member needs, we really focus on a few common denominators. So something that is at the heart of how we measure engagement is what we call carrot plans. So as the name implies, it really is effectively the member's guide through their navigation of fertility healthcare, and our experts curate recommended next steps for those members. So how members engage with those carrot plans, how frequently they're being refreshed, whether recommendations in their carrot plan are being completed and engaged with, is certainly the highest level marker for us around engagement. Then, of course, you can always go down to the next level. So for every member, we can talk about what specific modalities of education and care they are consuming. Is it about self-service articles? Is it about completion of interactive guides that we have? Is it consultations with our experts? Is it participation in our group sessions, et cetera, et cetera? Are they filing reimbursements and using their financial stipend to pay for eligible care? All of those are sort of secondary markers, but at the end of the markers of engagement. But at the end of the day, it really is around engagement with care plans throughout the member's journey. That is core to our metric.
Right. So what's interesting is, like, I think the picture emerges really clearly, actually, that across all three businesses, the amount of engagements during the process with the care that that the member or the patient's receiving, the amount that they engage with it is a really kind of good leading indicator on whether they're going to have good outcomes or not. And so to that degree, I'm curious, the kind of we talk about the care plans a lot, and this, I know this is a pretty central concept in a lot of the digital healthcare businesses out there. Do you have any sort of ways to measure or actively kind of seek out both members who are highly engaged with their care, and members who are potentially like not engaged with their care, members who are potentially at the risk of, kind of, to use an e-commerce term, at risk of kind of dropping off? James, since you still have the mic.
Yeah, sure, Peter. So we typically expect that on average people refresh their carrot plans once every 3 months, and really we derive this sort of cadence based on sort of recognizing that in fertility healthcare, this isn't something that you check in on daily, weekly necessarily, because everybody sort of moves through the recommendations in their carrot plan sort of at their own pace, and the last thing we intend to do is add more pressure and guilt to what's already a very stressful journey. And so we use that 3-month benchmark as sort of how we monitor whether there are any members who are at risk of disengagement. And what we do really from that is run a series of campaigns that sort of or tactics that feel appropriate. And so, that's pretty diverse. So in some instances, it's about pushing prompts within the app to get them to reconnect with Carrot and to refresh their Carrot plans. In other instances, it's about creating meaningful ways to check in with our members and surface events and topics that may be interesting to them. So we have an entire member engagement team that's focused on running campaigns and mailers and events and webinars that are highly targeted for those members to drive them back to re-engagement. In many of these, they're sort of events that are probably familiar to many of us, but we have found that the key is to connect what the topic of the event is with how they then can make the most out of their carrot benefit. So in February for Black History Month, we focus on sort of resources that are relevant to Black maternal health and highlight how doulas and engagement with doulas and why sort of financial coverage for doulas can improve both outcomes in the Black community. So we have many examples and an entire sort of member engagement calendar throughout the year where we deploy this, but we found the most success in driving re-engagement as connecting that last dot to how Carrot can deliver value for our members.
Right, and you're closing the loop, and you're in the very fortunate position, of having, supporting teams to do this, and teams of engineers and product leaders and marketers and all sorts of folks who help to kind of stitch together those engaging events and messaging and comms. I'm curious, Tanya, Molly, jump in if you like. How are you thinking about this at the seed stage? Because of course, things tend to be a little bit more scrappy, and the re-engagement of members and patients tends to be a little bit more kind of hands-on. So I'm curious if either of you have any anecdotes there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a product team of 1 and I manage an engineering team of 2. So we definitely get a little bit, have to get a little creative with how we re-engage people. I think there's I guess to start with engagement for me, I have my first product role was in e-commerce, and what we talked about in terms of engaging with a product and buying something and shopping, and that was very different from when I was at Maven, and it was weekly, your pregnancy is changing, so that's engagement. It was seeing what people did every week and wanting them to log in. And I think you have to be really thoughtful about what engagement looks like for you. And you can't just jump in and say okay, we have an app and it's daily active users and that's all we care about, because
right.
The quality of the engagement and the type of engagement and how an individual person considers themselves engaged is so important in creating a good patient experience, or really any user experience. I use the example of I talk to my mom on the phone 3 times a week. I am a highly engaged user in that sense. And my best friend, who's also close with her mom, talks to her every 2 weeks. She's also highly engaged. And that, the frequency doesn't really indicate that. So all that to say, I just think it's really nuanced, and coming up with the right metrics and knowing that what you're tracking actually is going to achieve, if your goal isn't clicks, if your goal is something bigger, then making sure that those things line up is important. In terms of tracking it right now, or I shouldn't say right now because it's evolved a little bit. At the beginning of Alara, we were okay, we need to know if someone is still around, what are they doing? Just because they're paying doesn't mean they're still using the product.
Right.
And so we started, basically it was if someone misses an appointment, or if we give them a few items to do, and the to-do items are like book your next appointment or like fill out intake, and they haven't done any of them, send like a task to our patient care team and say like, hey, go check in with this person. And it became crazy overwhelming, and obviously we had to we had to scale that. But it was super simple. It was just like, give someone a heads up when people seem to be completely dropping off. And then that gave us a sense of like, okay, what patterns led to that? What, maybe it's a provider matching issue. Maybe it's, just not relevant for them, or their goal is too hard and they've been ignoring it. And so doing it really manually actually gave us like the benefit of doing almost like a little bit of user research while we resolved those issues. So definitely had to get a little creative there. But I think doing it manually can actually be kind of a benefit in the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure, Tanya, you're nodding. So does that chime?
Yeah, it definitely resonates. I wouldn't say like the strategies for how you re-engage patients necessarily changes all that much. Obviously, like a team focused on it can do a lot more than one person, but I think like the way you measure patient engagement has definitely changed. So like at Evie, we are a 10-person team. I'm also a one-woman product team. And so we rely really heavily on what people directly tell us, like NPS data, CX data that we're seeing. We sit there, we read every single ticket that comes in, and that's how we formulate the product decisions that we make. Versus when I worked at Row and we had a killer data team, we were running all of these regression models for what features are most correlated with historical retention and making our decisions based off that. But I don't think one is necessarily better than the other. You want to set yourself up for success with both. And one interesting anecdote I remember is we would look at monthly cohorts for like people who were going through hair loss and see different dips in retention. And we were like, why is this happening? And with the qualitative research, we actually learned that the treatment you use for hair loss actually causes you to lose your hair before you start regrowing it. So I think like, even though we were collecting all of this data and we had all of this amazing modeling happening, we weren't able to anchor on that like very simple clinical fact about why people maybe were churning. So I think like bringing the two halves together is what's ultimately the most important.
Yeah, I mean that combination of qual and quant, and understanding that there's always some type of interpretation that's needed at the end of the day. So I guess we've talked about in the course of conversation, a couple of metrics have been mentioned: daily active users, CSAT. NPS score, maybe to kind of get a little bit more tactical here. So we've been talking a lot about, the sort of broad brush strokes of remembering, looking at from the top funnel, we're thinking about driving outcomes. We know that the more that someone's engaged, probably the better outcomes they're going to have. So tying the room together a little bit, how do you think about standing up the actual sort of underlying MVP tech stack that you need to go out and actually build these metrics and make sure you're capturing the data that can drive these metrics, even if you're not necessarily going to do the analysis up front? You don't necessarily start a business with a data scientist in your back pocket, but you know that in 6 months' time, or in a year's time, or 2 years' time, we want to be able to go back and look at this data and do some crunching on it, because it'll probably turn out to be quite useful. So I'm curious. I know both Tanya and Molly, you both have thought about this and are in the process of thinking about this. So what does that sort of MVP tech and data stack look like for you that helps you to kind of capture those metrics? Maybe Molly, take it away.
Sure. So I think your tech stack I focus more on the tech stack than the data stack, to be completely honest. Like what a patient's journey is going to look like from like the service design standpoint, and then say, okay, what are they going to be doing? And then I'll dig into that and say, what do I need to like know that they did, and what are the metrics that might be interesting at this point? Versus like, I think the reverse might be like, these are all the data points I want, and what can I do to like facilitate getting them? I think you're just going to get a better outcome by thinking about the person as like a person, and kind of thinking about like, what are they going to do, and what's their experience going to be like, and what are the interesting pieces of that I can capture. So I think setting it up, I mean, I when it comes to like fully setting up an MVP, I'm almost always a build over buy person. I think one thing that helped me a lot, some advice that a tech advisor gave me, was to really like dig into the features I need. So not just say like, I need an EMR and I need some analytics, but say like, what are the features of that EMR that I need? What are the features of that analytics tool I need? And then go out into the world. I think it can be, especially now, there are so many great tools available that you'll kind of get like overwhelmed with like, oh my gosh, I never thought maybe I do need that. And at the beginning, you have to kind of stay super focused and think about the patient journey and what you absolutely need to kind of test out that MVP experiment that you're going for. So that's sort of my MVP spiel. But I think, you know, at the end of the day, if it's too expensive or if it's like a super differentiator of your business and no one else does it, then obviously you build some stuff, and that's where like the fun product can also come in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the shiny object, problem that exists in tech and increasingly so in healthcare. So Molly, you are putting yourself on one end of the spectrum, build versus buy. I know this is not specifically a build versus buy conversation. There are a lot of other forums for that. But Tanya, where do you lie on that build versus buy spectrum?
Yeah, I've definitely seen both sides of the coin. I worked at Row where we literally built everything ourselves, and I didn't really know that there was another way. So I really got schooled in that this year, to be honest. And honestly, half the time when we were building everything ourselves, it was really hard to tie that incremental work to patient success. And so I kind of made a little note to myself to be really crisp with how we want to allocate our time and what our true metrics are as a company. So when I joined Evie, and our tech team was really two main people, we were forced to look outside of ourselves because we just couldn't build things in-house necessarily. And like Molly, I realized there had been so many cool companies like Capable that had been built over the last couple of years. And so I think my rule of thumb was really to think about where do we want our innovation to be, and then who can we partner for the rest. And at Evie, our innovation is definitely around like our personalized results experience, our like really personalized coaching. That's something that we will never take away from our chest. So how do we partner with other suitable partners to build things like provider chat, which do we want to build provider chat? Is that going to be a differentiator for us? Probably not. So that's how I kind of make the build versus buy decision.
Yeah, I think that really resonates with me. I mean, when I was the CTO at Candid, we constantly had this build versus buy conversation going on. And in the beginning, when I joined, I was the first technical hire, so I had no team, I had no analysts, I had no engineers, I had no product leaders. It was just me. And in addition to kind of hiring the first cohort of engineers and scaling up the product, I also was responsible for writing all of the SQL queries to work out what the heck was actually going on in this business. And so in addition to doing all these other jobs, I wrote something like 200 or more SQL queries that answered everything from how many patients did we intake yesterday, and how many aligners have we printed, and how many teeth have we straightened. And then of course, as we scaled up, I was able to kind of like actually start offloading some of that stuff to third-party vendors, and we could get all the fancy tools. We could stand up our own BI tooling and our own data pipelining. And I definitely would never want to go back to writing 200 SQL queries again, and I don't recommend it to anyone else. So yeah, I think your build versus buy kind of tends to calibrate depending on where you are and kind of in your journey. Yeah, I think as we kind of like get to the sort of deeper and deeper into the weeds on this stuff, one thing that I'm always curious about is, as you start to kind of accelerate through the business and the various stages of business that you're in right now, when you look back, like, how did you figure all of this stuff out? If you take a pause and sort of look to where you are and look where you got, a lot of us are just kind of learning on the fly. And I'm curious if any of you have, some wisdom to impart on how to get really good at this stuff, because it's not super obvious to the layperson. Maybe James, to kick it off.
Well, I'll say for the years that I've been doing this, I'm not convinced there is another way other than, learn on the fly and experiment and monitor, which which is why this conversation is super exciting to me, because a lot of the conversation has really been about how you run lightweight experiments and really adapt from them. To me, the one tip I will have, though, is, and it's not a resource, but rather how to think about unpacking some of the complexity here. And it's really about thinking through incentives and motivations, right? So for Carrot Fertility, we are a B2B to C business. So we specifically offer our benefit through employers in order to then serve employees at those employers. And so for us, we really often have to think through structurally the different incentives of our members or the employees vis-a-vis the employer, who is our customer at the end of the day, investing in this benefit. And so, an example is, how do you strike the right balance to be as accessible as possible and serve as many members as possible, while ensuring that members that have the highest need and that we optimize the dollars investment spend of the customer or the employer is as effective or as efficient as possible. And so there are a bunch of ways that we do this, including sort of ensuring that we offer a bunch of resources that are relatively low cost and scalable for us to as many members as possible, while then sort of establishing some level of engagement point, for example, the carrot plans that I referred to before, that then might trigger sort of additional benefits and therefore costs. The other way that we manage this is to think about how to structurally align both the teams that serve members as well as the teams that serve our customers or our employers. So at Carrot, both of those functions are actually on the same team, reporting to the same executive. And so to some degree, that forces early identification of any of those conflicts and to ensure that we as a company are appropriately balanced on both of those fronts.
Yeah, that's super smart. And I think that kind of coming together and making sure that everyone on the same page is super relevant. I'm curious, from your perspective, Molly, how do you think about that? I mean, are you, do you have a structured approach to how you got good at this, or is it a case of just continuing to learn and innovate? And
I don't think it's definitely not structured, but I think like the trial and error definitely helps. I know when I joined Alara, I was the first employee, and I was like, my goal was to build this app and to like get patients in and actually start having a platform. And I was like, okay, I have never done this where I have like nothing available to me. Like I have nobody to bounce, like no engineer or like somebody to kind of give me a limitation or something. And so I think in that case, like I was forced to go find these like communities where I could ask a bunch of questions. I would like go on LinkedIn and I'd be like, hey, I see that you're the head of product at this company that I think is like doing a great job. And, could you explain, like, can we just like talk for like 20 minutes about how you do this one thing? And people were super receptive to it. And I got so much great advice and so many interesting ways to like look at the problem. So I feel like it gave me, I got like all of these other experience, like I had the trial and error of all these other people to sort of reference, and that was huge. So like asking for help is always my kind of first move in this. But I think coming out of that, my structure now is to figure out what matters to your business and what matters to your patients, and then like stay as focused on that as you possibly can. So for Alara at the beginning, it was like, all we care about is if a patient comes in and they meet with a provider and they work with that provider, we should see them get healthier. And so for that, the tech we need is like an email and a Zoom link and like a survey. Like that was it. And so if you stay super focused on that, you'll kind of like, I think it really helps you like build from there versus it's so easy to get so overwhelmed by like all the options of metrics, or like you hear of a company that's doing this like really cool innovative thing and you feel behind. I think like staying focused on what you need for your own goals has really helped me, build the right things, or like test the right things, I should say, and then led to building the right things, hopefully.
Yeah. Yeah, I that very much resonates with me, and I can share that one of the challenges that we had at Candid, and this is a high quality problem, this is a champagne problem, as they say, but like we onboarded so many people so quickly to this business. When I joined, I was employee number 9 or 10 or something like that, and I blink an eye and suddenly we're 400-500 people. And one of the big problems that you run into when that happens is that you suddenly realize that nobody uses the same language to describe this business, right? So some people talk about, this as being a good patient experience, and they're using this metric. And then the marketing team who's working with Facebook ads the whole time, they're talking about CSAT. That's the only thing that they look at, because boy, when your CSAT drops below a threshold, you do not want to know what happens then. And then, so we actually ended up doing this thing where every single new hire to the company went through a whole round of kind of new hire onboarding sessions, and one of them was an introduction to the data at the company, an introduction to the metrics that we use, what we call them, what they measure, why they're important, and ultimately we were trying to always tie them to the company goals. So if we had a quarterly goal of like improving NPS by a certain amount, or a company goal of improving retention by a certain amount, everyone knew what retention actually meant, how did we measure it, why it's important. And I think that's something that, it sounds super boring, but you kind of need to start thinking about those things at some point in the company's growth. Cool. Well, time is flying by. We have quite a few questions that have come in from the audience. So we'd love to kind of hand over to some of those, and thank you very much for everyone in the comments for getting involved. Before we do that, we're going to put up a quick poll for you in the Zoom room. So do feel free to take part in the poll. It should pop up on your screen momentarily. But the first question here that's come in, which is a question from Grace, is how do you keep in touch with members? Via email, via text, through your app. And I guess potentially, I'm ad-libbing here, but I guess potentially the add-on to that question is, have you found that any of those channels are more successful at others than for keeping that member engagement up? Tanya, what do you think?
Yeah, I kind of have a funny story about this. We had launched a huge feature at Row, but forgot to turn on the email triggers. And I definitely thought I lost my job that day. But what we learned is that no one looks at our web platform without being prompted. So for us, like email and text using CRM was the most effective way to communicate with members. We obviously don't have like an iOS app, so I think push notifications are a great way. But for a web portal, I learned at least no one's automatically logging in and checking that every day.
James, I'm sure that you have a multi-touch approach, but I'm curious.
Well, actually, until coming soon, we've intentionally avoided any native app capabilities ourselves, primarily because there's just a lot of inertia that comes with investing in yet another modality, and the reality is if the lack of some of those modalities are not barriers to engagement, where 40% of our members already use our mobile responsive product just fine, then like none of us needs a 71st app on our phone, right? So we primarily have just stayed with the ones that are most common. But yeah, email, mailers, We're starting even to do, fax and phone calls. It's fascinating. Like those weren't high priority ones for us, but certainly as you go overseas and you consider other sort of socioeconomic elements to and barriers to care, all of those modalities become important to us. But I wouldn't say one is any more important than another. I think the key is parity and service across as many of them as possible.
Right, meeting a member where they are. Yeah. So another question that's come in, which I think is a super interesting one, is this is a question asking, I'd like to understand a bit more from all the panelists on your process in identifying the right metrics. Are there specific steps that you took that were really enlightening or not in getting to what the right OKRs or KPI should be for your business? We sort of touched on this tangentially earlier, but Molly, curious from your perspective whether this was a structured process or something that's evolving.
Not that structured usually, but I think there's like a lot of ways you can sort of get at this. Again, like high level being like, what is the goal? Why does this company exist is the first place to start. And that kind of gets everybody on board. And then digging into that and looking at like certain like areas of the product can help. So something that we've like that when we did a project around our onboarding experience, which is for us, it's like from when a user like clicks, like check if I'm eligible for this service to when they pay. We wanted to redo that. We were like, okay, what are the right metrics? Obviously, like conversion is sort of like the top metric. But we knew that it wasn't really nuanced enough to say just conversion. So I like to do like some sort of session where we kind of go through a few metrics and then we say, what's the balancing metric to that. And so for example, like say you're looking at conversion, the balancing metric to that is like, we want the same number of people to get to that conversion step than like as previous. So we don't want to be like, the last question is, will you commit to spending money on this on the next screen, which your conversion is going to be 90%, but you're going to get, a tiny amount of people who actually answer that question positively. So I like to get some sort of balance of like, we should see this number of people signing up, but we should see the cancellation stay flat or something like that. I like doing that because it kind of gets people thinking more creatively about what a nice, well-rounded metric might be. And then also like our operational teams will weigh in so that we aren't, driving something in the product, but like screwing over the clinical teams that now have to deal with it. And so I think that's something that's like an approach that I like, is just being really collaborative about the metrics and not doing like a top-down metrics thing. There's obviously, positives and negatives to that, but for a team that's really small, it's kind of nice to say like, everybody gets a voice on this and what do you think is going to be important and why? And we typically come up with like more creative things doing it that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think like there's definitely sort of like standard metrics that every industry has, right? Like if you're running an e-commerce business, you will probably naturally speak about conversion rate and LTV and time through funnel and things like that. And it's quite tempting in a healthcare business, particularly a digital health business that's largely kind of virtual or delivered virtually, to sort of apply those metrics to your business. And in many cases, they kind of make sense. But in some cases they don't. Like, a very long time ago, I worked in media and publishing, and there everyone's obsessed with clicks. Everything's measured in clicks. How many clicks do we get? And you start to realize clicks are a pretty empty metric. They're pretty empty calories, I think someone once described them to me as. And you kind of need to find the right metric for your business. And obviously, if you have stakeholders, James, like you do, you sort of to some degree also have to report and have to report the metrics that they know and that they understand, right? Yeah. Cool. Time for a couple more. Fantastic questions. Keep them coming. We'll try and get through as many of them as we can. This is a great question. Did any of you start with community to help deliver care? and learn about how to deliver the care along with who uses your product the most. So question about sort of delivering care within a community and how that helped you to kind of learn about your product. Maybe this might be something relevant to Evie. So Tanya, is this something that you've experimented with?
Yeah, the Evie community is amazing and definitely like our most hyper engaged group of users. I feel like we've learned a lot, and so many of us at the company read our Facebook group almost every single day, just learning more about what are the trends that people are talking about, what are people interested in, and how do we reflect that in our products so that we can stay relevant. I think also if we don't do that, there might be a misnomer that we don't care about certain issues in the vaginal health community, and we never want to be in that position. We want to be a part of the conversation and even ahead of the conversation. So we definitely care a lot about that community. We've used it as a way to deliver care, as a way to soothe people who are going through like pretty difficult types of conditions. And it's just been the best testing ground to test new ideas and get feedback too.
Awesome. Marley, how have you thought about community at Alara?
So actually, when I first was like learning about Alara, Rachel, our founder, and I were talking, and she was like, yeah, like where I'm focusing on PCOS, and you can go on Reddit and look up like how people are talking about PCOS. And it was this gigantic Reddit community of women who were like, what am I supposed to do now? My gynecologist can't help me, like all this stuff. And it was like a good like it was kind of interesting to see where it was like, it helped me realize that one, this condition is like a real thing that has a problem that needs a solution. When you see people going to Reddit to deal with their conditions, like they clearly don't have a good place to go. And so that community, like it wasn't even ours, but I learned so much from it. I reached out to people from it and like did user interviews with them before we even built anything. And now our Alara community is great. It's helped us test things like very similar to what Tanya is saying, like asking them about ideas or just hearing how they talk about how they're feeling, how they talk about, are they feeling like empowered by certain things? Are they feeling really let down by certain things? Like getting that sense of the tone of our broader community. And also doing things like events through it, like being able to kind of spin up a quick like webinar on a topic because it seems to be something people are interested in. We've done a few like nutrition courses off of it because we saw that people really needed just like tangible advice from a dietitian. And that's something that we could spin up super fast. And it was, a great offering we could do. And that was all just by asking people like, hey, what are you interested in? What do you want to see?
Yeah. Interesting that you mentioned kind of Reddit there, and I'm curious, there's obviously challenges running communities of all sizes and shapes. You get beyond a certain number of members and the social platforms tend to be very awesome for attracting a lot of members, but not necessarily always the long-term kind of management of that community. So have you stuck with those platforms, or are there other tools or services that you think are better suited for kind of healthcare membership?
We do not have an actual Reddit community. I was on like a PCOS subreddit where I found that, but we spun up our own. I've seen a lot of like when we first were looking for a platform, there are so many out there, and they really like, there are ones that are specific for doing courses. There are ones that are specific for like message boards. Some of them you'll talk to them and they'll be like, you're describing Facebook, just go use Facebook. And so I think it's like, again, identifying what is the goal of your community. Is it to offer classes? Is it to educate? Is it going to be clinical? Because that now you need a HIPAA compliant platform. Now you're talking about like group, care. So I think again, like,
and all that stuff.
Like,
yeah.
You want to get a sense of like, what is the goal of this community and what is like your minimum viable community? And then say, okay, great. Like, what are we, what do we need to build, or what do we need to like have to be able to deliver this in a compliant and like secure way?
Yeah. Cool. We're gonna have time for one more quick question, and then we'll hand over. So I think this is a great question for James that came in the 11th hour. I'd love a deep dive on NPS, Net Promoter Score. How do you collect this seamlessly? What frequency do you use? Where do you collect it in the journey? What is the average response rate? James, feel free to answer as much of that as you can,
Sure.
or have access to.
I will confess, I don't know the average response rate off the top of my head. Our wonderful customer success team manages that, and I don't necessarily know all of the mechanics. But what I'm happy to share is the following. We primarily think about NPS from the customer, or in this case, employer's point of view, and not necessarily the member's point of view. I think it's a bit of an odd question in our context to ask the prompt that is behind NPS. And so we primarily sort of frame it in terms of how likely are benefits buyers and HR leaders likely to recommend Carrot Fertility as an offering to other fellow employers. And so that's primarily how we use NPS in our monitoring, and there are certain triggers that collect it. So be it at the end of a quarterly business review or at the end of a key milestone, such as implementation completion. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, you have a similar challenge to the one that we had, also at Candid, whereby someone is happy at the end when they've got straight teeth, and like it takes a very long time to get that. So if you try and measure NPS, a week after you've shipped them their impression kit, they're like, "Why are you asking me this question? My teeth are still wonky, and like I haven't got my aligners yet. So this is a stupid question." And they would actually do thumbs down. So you've got to be quite careful about how you measure that and when. Well, look, folks, that's all we've got time for. I know we have a lot more questions, and if you didn't get your question answered, then the panel, myself, and I know the other panelists would love to help answer any questions that you have. And so please do feel free to reach out. I'm very happy to pick up the phone anytime, and I know the others are too. So. With the last 2 minutes left, I'm going to hand back to Ray, I believe, to give out to close us out and tell us how we can find the recording. But before I do, I'll just finally make one last note that if you are interested in hearing about Capable Health and how we can help you accelerate your product development and get you to market faster, then please reach out. I'm peter@capablehealth.com, and I'll get back to Ray.
Yeah, thank you. That was amazing. I definitely like took a few things away myself. Yeah, as Peter said, we've recorded this webinar, so no worries. You'll get an email with the webinar recording, and then we'll do our best. We've captured all the questions that were asked, so we'll do our best to summarize those questions with answers in a separate follow-up as well. So thanks for everyone on the panel for giving an hour of your day, and thanks for everybody who was able to attend. Hope you enjoyed as much as I did. Take care. Bye.